This is Melissa Turner, and she calmly waited 4 hours while her boyfriend died. They had a new house, cute animals, and their social media was filled with posts about endless love. We're going to show you how this perfect picture shattered in one night. Because on the morning of October 18th, Matthew would be found brutally murdered, and the most terrifying part is that Melissa waited 4 hours while in the house with his body before calling the police. And make sure you watch until the end, because that's where we'll try to figure out what made her wait so long and what truth was hiding behind this insane act. Welcome to Vendetta, guys, and just so you know, I upload at least 2 videos a week, and to not miss them, you should subscribe to the channel and hit the bell so you don't miss new videos. I'll be eagerly awaiting your comments about where you're watching from, what time it is for you right now, and tell me your favorite season. Alright, let's begin. This is the story of Melissa Turner, and yeah, grab your imaginary sunscreen and flip-flops, because today we're heading way down south to the humid swamps of Florida. Well, okay, maybe not right into the swamps. You know, we're not trying to film Crocodile Dundee here. But we'll be close enough to see alligators regularly, and they are literally everywhere there. We're diving into the Tampa Bay area. That's on the west coast of the Sunshine State. What's there besides the sun? Well, a bunch of theme parks, miles of golden beaches, and a population of about 3 million people. It's a whole city, and you know, if you love that sticky, humid weather, sandy beaches, or, importantly for us, an unusually high level of insanity, then Tampa Bay is definitely your place. Trust me, today's case justifies that reputation 100%. It's right here, in this very Tampa Bay, that we find our main character, Melissa Rose Turner. She was born on November 25th, 1992, making her a classic 90s kid. You know, one of those who is just old enough to remember what life was like without the internet, but like, barely, right on the edge. Growing up in Florida, Melissa was, well, a totally ordinary girl. She had a generally comfortable upbringing. She watched movies like Baywatch, remember that show, and Evil Dead 2. So she clearly had a thing for horror films, and she was into all kinds of fantasy. But for Melissa, there was one thing, one place, that caused her real grief, and that was her weight. In her late teens, she weighed over 250 pounds, which is, by the way, 114 kilograms. And, as often happens, this just killed her self-confidence. But it wasn't just about confidence. This weight literally prevented Melissa from doing what she really wanted to do, like cosplay. If anyone isn't in the loop, cosplay is this activity, this performance, where people put on costumes, some accessories, to portray a fictional character. Well, you've definitely seen it. And so, at the age of 18, Melissa was deeply unhappy in her life, and there were several reasons for this. Look, although she earned an associate's degree in small business, which is pretty good, unfortunately, she didn't have a job that really reflected that. Meaning, she had the diploma, but no job. Classic. So, picture this. Besides the huge problems with her weight, she had over $26,000 in student loan debt. It's no wonder she was suffering from depression, which affected literally every aspect of her life. And it was at this moment, at her absolute lowest, that Melissa finally decided that enough was enough. She had to do something about it. It was time to find some courage and start taking action against her problems, and she started acting. Melissa radically changed her diet and her entire lifestyle. She literally sat down at the computer and started reading blogs, forums, and e-articles, just to better understand how health and nutrition work. And the result? The result was incredible. Throughout this whole time, her body weight just changed beyond recognition, dropping from 112 kilograms in 2011 to 74 kilograms in 2013. That means she lost 42 kilograms. That is a colossal difference. This weight loss, of course, had very noticeable physical differences. But the most important aspect of all this was that she finally started to love herself again. She started to feel happy. Around 2013, on this wave of change, Melissa got close to a man known online by the nickname Sin. Eventually, they got together, and this officially became the start of the first serious relationship in Melissa's life. In parallel with this, Melissa also became a professionally trained makeup artist and special effects artist, meaning she found a use for her passion for horror. And of course, she started actively dressing up or cosplaying her favorite characters. And it's safe to say that as Melissa got slimmer and her horror cosplay got meaner and more professional. The online comments about her appearance just started to skyrocket, and this, of course, led to an equally rapid growth in her confidence. Look, positive body image is, without a doubt, a very important thing, regardless of your weight, height, or figure. That's basic, but Melissa's confidence, it seemed, somehow rapidly exceeded the usual trajectory. And you're about to find out why I'm emphasizing this, because as 2014 approached, a lot changed in Melissa's life. She had a new body, she had a boyfriend, and she had a lot of new friends. And so, while attending parties of one of these new friends, she meets a woman who, well, just happened to be a webcam model. This was the moment. This is where Melissa first learned about this, let's say, strange world of online adult entertainment, and most importantly, of course, about the money that was behind it all. And there was big money behind it. Look, Melissa was already used to the attention, even a lot of attention, that she got from cosplay, but becoming a webcam model. Oh, that was a completely different thing. It's, as someone aptly noted, something like cosplay, but, well, without the clothes. Despite this, Melissa, it seems, didn't even think about it for long, seriously. She started working on becoming a webcam model literally the very next day. And you can probably understand her. After all, her past odd jobs at Great American Cookies and Hargenders. Well, let's be honest, they led her nowhere. And then add to that the fact that she finally felt this huge, just insane confidence in her new body. The stars aligned. From then on, Melissa adopted an online nickname, Tooth-Worn Rose. Her new gig, her new business, developed slowly, but very surely. And after she established herself over the first few years, she eventually earned enough money to completely support herself. Being a webcam model is one of those weird new professions that the internet spawned. While it, in theory, doesn't necessarily have to be an erotic experience, the general definition still leans toward models who perform certain actions online in exchange for money, goods, or just attention. Melissa, obviously, found a great opportunity for herself in this, and the steady growth of her channels only proved it. But, as always happens in this business, after a while, when she, let's say, grew up a bit, this line of work began to slow down competition. Younger models, of course, appeared in the spotlight, so Melissa decided it was time to try something new. So, becoming essentially an independent webcam model, she decided to go further. She started creating her own, let's say, themed adult films for money. And since she already knew this stuff, many of these films focused on cosplay or horror. Again, Melissa had this special inclination for everything creepy and terrifying. So, well, why not combine business with pleasure, right? Her independent website, toothwornrose.com, immediately started to grow. She began publishing her work on various online platforms, and even, of course, launched her own Patreon page. Couldn't forget that, and all these sources of income. This whole stream eventually led to earning thousands of dollars a month. Here I have to give a general warning. Just don't search her name on Google. I'm being completely serious. Don't. Trust me on this. You will find much more than you bargained for. I often search the internet for different media files for these stories. And for this specific video, there was just a huge amount of content. Let's just say, not much of it I could use on YouTube. I think you understand what I mean. In any case, Melissa's online business was going, well, very well for a while. And in 2016, she and her boyfriend Sean decided to expand their career through entrepreneurship, which is a logical step. Together they opened their own home studio, meaning right in their home, where other models could come and use their equipment for photo shoots. And all this, of course, for a small fee. And on paper, this seemed brilliant. Seriously, it seemed like the couple had created a small, but stable money-making machine right in their own house. But there's always a but. Over time, it seems all this work gradually fell exclusively on Melissa's shoulders. She was carrying it all. Add to this frequent arguments and, as reported, even accusations of violence. And it becomes clear why Melissa and Sean eventually broke up. And as a result, their joint business, of course, collapsed, leaving Melissa on her own again. And this was probably not the best moment for a breakup. Since in March 2017, Melissa had just undergone 2 serious surgical operations. It was a corsetplasty of the torso and a thigh lift, But, as they say, where one flower dies, another blooms. And the void left by Sean's departure was very quickly filled by another man. It was in the summer of 2017 that Melissa Turner met Matthew Trussler and fell in love with him. So who was Matthew? He was born on January 11th, 1994, so he was a bit younger than her. And he grew up in Hopkinton, Massachusetts, which, I have to say, is a completely different world compared to the humid state of Florida. Hopkinton is this classic small town, located about 30 miles west of Boston, literally in the middle of the Green Boonies, with a population of about 18,000 people. There, let's be honest, isn't much to talk about. But if we focus specifically on Matthew, he was described as a fun and very hardworking guy. Matthew had a strong bond with his friends and an even stronger bond with his family. And what's really noticeable in all his photos, it just jumps out, is that he was a person who cared incredibly about animals. This guy, it seems, genuinely loved his cats and dogs. He studied at Westfield State University, and after graduation, he managed to advance through several positions and eventually became the general manager of a local Italian restaurant. Things for Matthew were going, in principle, relatively well. But let's be honest, for a young man with his qualifications, it's completely understandable that he had bigger dreams than managing a restaurant in the middle of nowhere. And so by 2015, Matthew was finally fed up with it all. And since his brother Sean was already living in Florida at that time, Matthew decided, why not? And moved to Tampa Bay. This was a smart move. It allowed him to spend more time with his brother, and also, more importantly, it opened up access to more profitable and, hopefully, interesting work. This led to him finding a new job at a tech company called Lantern Energy, and shortly after that, he found another new job at Elite Foam, a company that specializes in residential insulation. And, of course, to bring Matthew into this story, he met Melissa. By Christmas 2018, Matthew and Melissa seemed to be living one of the most exciting moments of their lives. I mean, look for yourselves. Not only had they been dating for quite a while, but their work was going relatively well in Matthew. Yes, he even managed to appear in a few of Melissa's videos. So after what seemed like such a healthy start to their relationship, they decided to join forces and bought a house together. It was a 4-bedroom, 1-bathroom house on White Barn Way in Riverview, Florida. And this, considering their age, was a big achievement. They had everything they needed to thrive as a young, successful couple. The house was located in the desirable Boyett Farms neighborhood. It had 4 bedrooms, a garage, a yard, and even a fenced-in pool. And besides all that, they had 4 cats and 1 very cute puppy named Lantern. On January 11th, 2019, on his 25th birthday, Matthew published a post on Facebook in which he expressed his gratitude for life. He wrote, quote, "Quarter of a century in, I have a mortgage, a puppy, for fur babies, and an amazing girl. I'm a happy man. I also realized I'm getting old because instead of sleeping in, I was up at 6:30 without an alarm." End quote. That sounds like the dream. Social media, as it does, seemed to portray just a perfect couple. Or, at least, mostly perfect. There were, however, problems. After the breakup with her previous boyfriend, Sean, he was, supposedly, terribly jealous of the new couple, and, apparently, he even threatened them, pulling a gun on Matthew. That's a serious accusation. Nevertheless, online, Melissa and Matthew looked absolutely happy. For example, in September 2018, Melissa wrote that her relationship with Matthew was wonderful, and that she was still just as happy as in the very beginning. In short, statements expressing boundless happiness with each other were evident from both sides of this relationship, and it's this exact detail, this public happiness, that will become very important a little later in this story. But this doesn't mean their relationship was perfect behind closed doors. Not at all. Apparently, the couple argued very often, and Matthew, as those close to him noticed, seemed to start isolating himself from friends and family. His own brother Sean also described their relationship with one word, toxic, and neighbors on White Barn Way often heard them yelling loudly at each other. Ultimately, we don't have any absolute proof to confirm what was really happening, but as far as we know, there were serious problems, and this was all happening despite their happy online masquerade. However, despite this, Matthew's Facebook profile, it seems, did eventually change. On September 23, 2019, Matthew published a very strange post in which he wrote, quote, "Don't be a fool and blame others. Fight your own war, whatever that means." Moreover, his relationship status on Facebook also suddenly looked like single, and this was after he had so openly expressed his love before. Of course, purely theoretically, this post might not have had anything to do with Melissa, and maybe his relationship status was always marked as single for some reason. Truthfully, we'll never know for sure. However, not even a month had passed since that strange post, when Matthew died. October 18th, 2019, 8:45 a.m. This is the time when most people are drinking coffee, getting ready for work. But not in this house. Officers were responding to a very disturbing phone call that came from one of the houses on White Barn Way. The caller was Melissa. She was calling emergency services for help. And the reason? Her boyfriend, Matthew Trussler, had been fatally attacked. When officers arrived, they saw a strange scene. All along the front of the Turner Trussler house, there were Halloween decorations set up. You know, cobwebs, skeletons. But that was all fake, because after turning into the backyard, that's where the atmosphere of decorative horror sharply changed to absolutely real horror. Melissa, according to her, apparently found her boyfriend dead on the patio. And after she, as she claimed, screamed and tried to perform CPR, he gave no reaction. She, obviously, found him in this state and, of course, had no idea what had happened to him. And, unfortunately, at this point medical intervention couldn't help save his life. It was too late. Matthew Trussler was pronounced dead at the scene. It was immediately clear to the experienced officers and paramedics who arrived on the scene. Matthew had been dead for quite some time. He looked colorless, and it seemed rigor mortis had already set in. And that takes time. It was also absolutely obvious that Matthew had been brutally, and I stress brutally, attacked. He had a deep wound, with several punctures and lacerations, found in the middle of his back, meaning this wasn't a single strike. It also looked like he had defensive wounds on his hands. He had clearly been fighting, and Melissa was devastated. She seemed to be traumatized and in deep shock. This was, a complete surprise to her. Or was it? Well, not quite. You see, this is where it starts to get interesting. While still at the scene, Melissa initially told officers that she found Matthew dead right in the yard. But after she was politely taken for questioning to the local police station, under the lights, her story suddenly changed drastically. According to her new words, the part about finding Matthew outside, that was all a lie. The new story, version 2.0, was that Matthew, it turns out, had been drinking all night. And early in the morning on October 18th, he came home drunk. This, of course, upset Melissa, which, in turn, upset Matthew. An argument started, and so, according to her, he apparently began to attack her, hit her several times. And then, in a sudden escalation, allegedly lunged at her with a kitchen knife. She, of course, like an action hero, apparently grabbed the knife and managed to somehow regain control. Which, true, led to an injury on her hand. But that's not all, then. Matthew, supposedly, started to choke Melissa, throwing her to the ground, and so, according to her, acting purely in self-defense. And only like that, Melissa stabbed the knife into Matthew's back in the back, during self-defense while being choked. An interesting tactic. This new version of events, to put it mildly, troubled the officers, and not just because she had already lied, her new testimony. It just didn't add up. It didn't quite match the evidence lying right in front of them. Matthew had several wounds on his body, not one. And many of these wounds seemed to have been sustained as a result of his self-defense and that injury on her hand. Experts looked at it and said it was consistent with a laceration received in a backward motion, as if she was the one holding the knife with all her might, not taking it away. And while Melissa was spinning her tales at the station, officers at the scene were turning over every stone, looking for incriminating evidence. This included any items left at the scene, as well as interviewing witnesses and searching for surveillance camera footage, and this right here. This is where new smart technology played an absolutely decisive role in this case. One of the officers, named Ryan Lagasse, noticed a Nest camera at one of the neighboring houses. This Nest surveillance camera was perfectly positioned. right next to the neighbor's front door and, very conveniently, was pointed directly toward the patio of the Trussler-Turner residence. Unfortunately, visually, not much could be seen. Melissa and Matthew's own fence blocked any visual confirmation. If that fence hadn't been there, Matthew's body would likely have been visible right on camera, however. And this is a huge however. Not all was lost. The camera couldn't see, but it could hear. It perfectly recorded all the audio during the fatal argument. And although the recording itself isn't available, we have the full, chilling transcript. Around 4:32 a.m., this is the middle of the night. Melissa is heard saying, "Stay." A minute later, the sound of breaking glass is heard. Sounds like the start of something terrible. And another 45 seconds later, she says, "Damn it." After that, she says, "I hate you." And 30 seconds later, she yells several times, "Get up." At 4:37 a.m., there's the sound of something breaking. Again, then screams, and Melissa yells again, "Wake up." But then she suddenly changes her tone and says, "So arrogant. I hate you." At 4:39 a.m., Melissa is heard repeating, "Go to hell" multiple times before saying, "Let's go." 3 minutes later, she's heard yelling, "Go away," before additional sounds are heard. The sounds of objects breaking, meaning it was complete chaos in there. At this point, Matthew's voice was also identified on the video, but unfortunately, it's unclear what exactly he said. At 4:44 a.m., so 12 minutes after the argument started, additional sounds of a fight are heard, including a desperate scream from Melissa, "No." And finally, a minute later, the final phrase. She says, "What did I do?" And there was another piece of evidence. Matthew's smartwatch. Its data fully corresponded with the camera's recording. According to the report, the watch stopped detecting his heartbeat just a few minutes after those last screams. It all added up. So, with her changing story, the chilling camera recordings, and the physical evidence, it became absolutely clear that Melissa was the one who killed her boyfriend. However, of course, the main question now is up for debate. Was this a tragic case of self-defense, or was it cold-blooded murder? And that small additional detail. That Melissa waited 4 hours. For hours she was in the house with a dead body before calling emergency services. That pointed to very, very heartless intentions. This doesn't look like panic, and as such, she was officially arrested on suspicion of the murder of Matthew Trussler. The legal proceedings for this case were, well, let's just say, pretty dry. Melissa, of course, continued to maintain her complete innocence. "It wasn't me, wasn't my fault." And she even agreed to an interview with the news channel WFLA, straight from jail. But, it didn't make her any smarter. Melissa kept making a bunch of stupid mistakes while already behind bars, for example, during phone calls to relatives, which, of course, are recorded. She bragged about all the money she had left from her modeling career. And this, as you can imagine, practically enraged the prosecutors. It started a logical discussion. Should Melissa, who was bragging about her wealth, be spending taxpayer money on a public defender? Or maybe she should actually be paying for her own private one. Shortly before the trial, Melissa was initially offered a deal: 25 years in prison if she just pleaded guilty to the murder of Matthew Trussler. However, she refused this offer, 25 years. No, instead, she offered 5 years, 5 years for murder. Well, because of this, to put it mildly, gigantic difference in sentences, no deal was reached, and instead, a full trial for Melissa began. And in court, Melissa's lawyer did everything possible to convince the jury that Matthew was a terrible, abusive partner, and that she, poor thing, was simply acting in self-defense. She, apparently, killed him solely out of a genuine fear for her own life. This line of defense. This was especially upsetting and painful for Matthew's family. You can imagine, going through the unspeakable trauma of losing a son. Then, probably, finding his, let's say, explicit photos through her social media posts, because she filmed him. And then sitting in court and hearing that he allegedly treated her cruelly. This must have been an incredibly difficult trial for their hearts and minds. But, fortunately, the jury saw through this lie. They simply didn't believe that Matthew was an abusive partner. There was no evidence of it. and they ruled that most of the wounds on Matthew's body absolutely did not match the version of events Melissa told. For example, a key point: the wound on his right forearm. Experts showed that it was sustained during his self-defense. Perhaps it was in a position where his forearms were instinctively raised to protect his chest and face from the knife that she was holding. That same recording from the Nest Cam and the data from the smartwatch turned out to be absolutely decisive evidence in this case. Together, they indisputably helped demonstrate the exact time and manner of Matthew's murder. And of course, it was also noted again and again in court that Melissa waited a total of 4 hours after the brutal attack on Matthew, before finally dialing 911. What does this show? It revealed the behavior of a killer who consciously wanted to see her victim dead, not an unfortunate partner caught up in an emotional moment. These are different things. The jury was given a choice: convict Melissa of second-degree murder, manslaughter, aggravated battery, or deliver an acquittal. And given all the evidence presented, they needed to make a wise choice. Ultimately, the jury agreed on the charge of second-degree murder, and as a result, Melissa Turner was officially found guilty of the murder of Matthew Trussler with aggravating circumstances. You have to understand that the crime of intentional second-degree murder is a first-degree felony in Florida, and it's punishable by up to life in prison. So, you could say, she was lucky to be sentenced to only 20 years and 6 months in prison. She will return to everyday life in 2040. She will still have a life. As we all well know, the consequences for Matthew, they are much longer lasting. In fact, they are eternal. His life was cut short. And by whom? The person whom, by all accounts, he loved and trusted the most. And I'll say it again. There was no evidence that Matthew posed any danger to Melissa. And there was also no evidence that he ever treated his partner cruelly. But it's obvious that Matthew, on the contrary, had a lot of love for those around him. He constantly talked about protecting those who lived in his home, both people and animals. Remember his post. And what a terrible irony. It's a real shame that one of those who lived in his home did something completely the opposite to him. Matthew left just a huge hole in the hearts of his family and friends. In this case, it's actually very interesting and important. It draws attention to another, darker side of domestic violence. One that we, let's be honest, don't often talk about or see in the media. We're used to a different narrative, although women, statistically, are far more likely to be victims of domestic violence. And that's a fact. Cases where men are the victims are very often ignored or simply neglected. And honestly, her sentence also didn't make much sense to me. Think about it. Melissa rejected a 25-year plea deal. She went to trial, risking a life sentence, was found guilty by a jury, and then received 20 years behind bars. That's less than the plea deal she refused. Where's the logic in that? I don't know, but in any case, one thing is for sure. I don't think Melissa will be modeling for much longer. At least, not in the format she was used to. Thank you so much for watching another video. If this video was interesting or perhaps informative for you, please don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't already. As always, please share your thoughts on this strange and tragic case in the comment section below. And I'll see you again soon with a new video. But until that moment comes, remember to take care of each other. Goodbye, and don't kill anyone.